This week on ANN, humanitarians respond to catastrophic flooding in Peru and Colombia that has affected more than 1 million people.
The Adventist Church's North American territory reinforces its historical position on separation of church and state.
And an Adventist educator from Australia makes history by receiving Thailand's highest academic award.
These stories and more coming up.
Our top story comes from northwestern countries in South America, where a coastal El Niño has caused mass destruction and has claimed hundreds of lives.
Floods and mudslides in Peru began in March and have destroyed 200,000 homes and affected approximately 1 million people.
It is estimated that more than 2,600 kilometers or 1,600 miles of roads and 242 bridges have been swept away.
At the time of this recording, the death toll reached 106.
Some areas in northern Peru have seen more rain in a week than they would have received in a decade. The heavy rain caused rivers to overflow, leaving families to live in tents without access to electricity, running water, or sewage systems.
Teams from the Adventist Development and Relief Agency in Peru have launched awareness campaigns and collected monetary donations to purchase urgently needed supplies.
ADRA Peru workers have also traveled to some of the region's most affected areas to distribute food, water, and clothing to families.
Devastation is also keenly felt across Peru's northern border and Colombia as a result of heavy rain that recently moved into the region.
The rain caused 3 rivers that surround the city of Mocoa to overflow into the city overnight on April 1, while most residents were sleeping. Of Mocoa's 40 neighborhoods, 17 were completely destroyed due to the water, mud, and debris that swept through the city.
At the time of this recording, there were 273 confirmed deaths, along with hundreds of injuries and missing persons reports.
Health officials fear a potential spread of disease, with morgues tending to more bodies than they are equipped to handle.
Adventist Humanitarians in Colombia are also on the ground serving their fellow citizens. ADRA Colombia has organized a volunteer center to solicit help for distributing urgently needed items.
The president of Colombia, Juan Manuel Santos, also thanked ADRA for their timely response to the tragedy.
To see more of ADRA's efforts, visit facebook.com/ADRA Peru and facebook.com/ADRA Colombia.
Recent events by both the legislative and executive branches of the U.S. government have brought the Johnson Amendment and participation in elections by nonprofits to the forefront. The Johnson Amendment is the 1954 amendment to the Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. The code prohibits tax-exempt organizations from endorsing or opposing candidates for office. The amendment was named after then-Senator Lyndon Johnson, who would later become the nation's president. At the time, Johnson had been targeted by a nonprofit during an election. While not controversial when passed, it is now viewed by some as an infringement on the religious liberty and speech rights of churches. The Seventh-day Adventist Church in North America, because of its biblical beliefs and practices, does not desire to intervene in elections. Additionally, the church has opposed certain previous proposals for a full repeal of the Johnson Amendment. Therefore, while recognizing the law's potential First Amendment concerns, the church reaffirms its opposition to legislative efforts to eliminate or weaken rules that prohibit nonprofits, including houses of worship, from endorsing or opposing candidates. The Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty for the church's North American territory, Orland Johnson, has more.
For all intents and purposes, it really was bad legislation, but it did create a vehicle for the church to be able to point to say that the separation of church and state can be protected under this particular amendment, so we've always generally been in support of it. However, the bad side of the amendment is that it actually came in and told the church what it could not do. And so with the good and the bad, what we generally look at with the Johnson Amendment is not that we support, quote unquote, the amendment, but we support the concept of the separation of church and state. And we're not in favor of any legislation that comes in place that limits what we can do as a church or puts new limitations on what we can do as a church. And that's why, as far as we're concerned, the status quo with the Johnson Amendment does that. But if any other amendment were to come into place or other new piece of legislation were to come into place that would take away what we currently have or put us in a more disadvantaged position, we would be against that.
An Adventist from Australia recently made history by receiving the top academic honor from the nation of Thailand. Juan Shipton was recognized for his significant contribution to education and science for his service at Asia Pacific International University. It was the first time the honor was given to both a foreigner and academic from a private university in the 100-year history of Thailand's Ministry of Education. Asia Pacific International University is the only Seventh-day Adventist university in Southeast Asia. Shipton served as the university's president from 2006 to 2010 and is currently conducting research for the university and teaching online. Shipton said, "Receiving the honor was most unexpected as it has been reserved traditionally for academics at state universities where the title is vigorously guarded. I simply could not believe that I was the first foreigner to break through the glass ceiling. And of course, it was a great advertisement for our Adventist university in Thailand."
After leaving a trail of destruction within 2 Australian territories, Cyclone Debbie is predicted to severely impact regions of New Zealand that are still recovering from powerful earthquakes that struck last November. The Category 4 storm struck Australia on March 28. It is estimated that the amount of money needed to repair damage in Queensland, Australia alone will run into the millions. The storm brought heavy rain and gusts up to 263 kilometers per hour, or 163 miles per hour. The affected areas stretch between Bowen and Airlie in Queensland to the farming lands of northern New South Wales, marking a span of 1,000 kilometers or 620 miles. In other words, the affected area is the approximate size of the U.S. state of Texas. At least 6 people were killed and tens of thousands are without electricity. The lingering effects of the storm have moved south to New Zealand, where the nation is currently experiencing heavy rains, which could cause severe flood. But even while the rains were pouring and the winds were howling in Australia, workers and volunteers of the Adventist Development and Relief Agency were on the ground. ADRA Australia has provided accommodation for residents in New South Wales evacuation centers. ADRA teams have also flown into Bowen, which has been isolated due to flooding of surrounding roads. There, ADRA workers delivered 500 liters of water and 2 generators. ADRA is also coordinating with local churches to assess damage before beginning cleanup efforts.
Now this story is served with a bit of irony. A food company that was co-founded by an Adventist who also served as the director of the church's Battle Creek Sanitarium is currently in the middle of a lawsuit on whether 2 of its employees were wrongfully dismissed due to Sabbath keeping. 2 former Kellogg employees made their appeal to the United States Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit on March 22. The appeal was made after a lower court found insufficient evidence the 2 Adventist plaintiffs were treated unfairly when they were fired for failing to work on Sabbath. Richard Tabura and Guadalupe Diaz were fired from their manufacturing jobs at a Kellogg plant in the U.S. state of Utah in 2012 for missing work on Saturdays. Tabura and Diaz did not work on Saturdays due to their religious observance of Sabbath from Friday evening to Saturday evening. The dismissal was made after the company implemented a work scheduling program called continuous crewing. The schedule required employees to work approximately 2 Saturdays a month. Tabura and Diaz were able to avoid working on the Sabbath by using paid days off or swapping shifts with fellow employees. However, it was assessed that they had too many absences within a 12-month period. They were fired after what Kellogg describes as progressive discipline measures. The court's decision will be given in 3 months.
Depression does not discriminate. It affects people of all ages, ethnicities, cultures, and socioeconomic statuses.
Depression can also lead to suicide. It is the 2nd leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds.
While its effects are widespread, depression can be prevented and treated.
The 2017 emphasis of this year's World Health Day on April 7 is depression.
The World Health Organization decided to dedicate its annual Day of Awareness to explain depression, how it's treated, and ways to reduce the stigma surrounding the condition.
Associate Director of Health Ministries for the Seventh-day Adventist World Church, Katia Reinert, has more.
So some of the big signs that we can easily recognize when somebody is having symptoms of depression would be, for instance, deep sadness for no reason. The person is withdrawn, they're not as bubbly as they used to be, or very involved with activities they enjoyed doing before, so that's a change on that kind of behavior. They may also be feeling like they want to be by themselves, isolate themselves from people that they usually were very happy to be with, their friends, or at church, for instance, people that used to be in a choir, they no longer want to be there, they don't want to bring people over. Another one, they have a hard time sleeping. So there's some 8 or 9 hallmarks. Another one has to do with weight gain or weight loss. Either they're eating too much or they're not eating enough. So for people who we notice some of the symptoms of depression, very key is encourage them to seek a health professional. Find out if really what they're feeling is depression or is it just the blues, you know. Help them to be able to see the need to get a diagnosis and make sure first. Secondly, be their friend. If it's a family member, show them love, understanding, because some of those behaviors are part of the disease, and so don't judge them for it, and be an encouragement to them. Pray with them, give words of hope, and provide information. That can also be very helpful.
Coming up, an organization in Sweden that champions vegetarianism honors the Adventist Church.
But up next, Adventist communicators exchange ideas and best practices on how to effectively minister within the world's digital landscape.
May I work in with you, young fella?
Yeah. Go for it.
That's the way you do it. Got to put a little weight on it. Well, I'll put it back up here for you.
Welcome back. The city of Westminster, England is still dealing with the aftermath of the terrorist attack that took place on the grounds of its House of Parliament and the Westminster Bridge.
It just so happened that the Director of Communication for the Seventh-day Adventist World Church, Williams Costa Jr., was in England shortly after the time of the attack.
Costa was in England to participate in a regional conference of Adventist communicators and technology specialists, also known as the Global Adventist Internet Network.
On his way to the conference, he stopped to give a first-hand report from Westminster.
It's a cold spring afternoon in London. Parks are filled with beautiful flowers, but there is a grieving atmosphere in the city. A few days ago, a terrorist attack took place in London. Many people died. Others were injured, and the entire city was startled. There are many items here: flowers, cards, memories, and messages for the mourning families. It's a truly sad situation. But the good news is, not far from here, a GAIN conference just took place at Newbold College. For 4 days, technicians and communicators discussed how to achieve the mission of spreading the good news by utilizing new technologies and processes to reach hearts. After GAIN, I went back to visit some of the places affected by the terrorist attack. With sadness, I could see the very place on the Westminster Bridge where the driver drove on the sidewalk and killed innocent people. That afternoon, in the exact spot where the last person was killed, there was a couple taking wedding photos. Yes, in some Asian countries, wedding dresses are red. The color caught my attention. More than the dress's color, I thought on the innocent blood that was shed, and the blood that runs through our veins. I also thought of the blood of Jesus, who gave his life to save us and give us the assurance of eternal life. The bride and the groom who were taking photos reminded me there is still hope in the middle of tragedy. Life goes on with the assurance that soon we will be happy eternally.
Seventh-day Adventist Church was recently recognized by a Christian Vegetarian Association in Sweden for its health message. The Wild Donkey Association gave the church its Vigo Prize on March 5. The award is given to the organization or person whose Christian faith inspired them to do something positive for animals. Recipients of the awards are also recognized for raising awareness on how food affects humans, animals, and the environment. Representatives of the Wild Donkey highlighted the efforts of the Swedish Adventist Church's Healthy and Smart initiative, vegetarian Christmas buffets, and vegetarian cooking courses. Special mention was also given to the church's ongoing lecture series on health and nutrition. It was said during the award ceremony that, quote, a number of Christian revivalist movements formed during the latter half of the 1800s saw it as a set position to contribute to a healthier lifestyle. One part of this was to advocate a vegetarian diet. The clearest position on this issue was and is still taken by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, end quote. The president of the Adventist Church's territory in Sweden, Goran Hansson, accepted the award on the denomination's behalf. He said the award was an unexpected surprise. Hansson said, quote, the prize encourages us to continue to live up to and contribute to Wild Donkey's motto. We want to encourage people to eat vegetarian as a way to reflect God's love for all beings of creation.
With the stroke of a pen, the director of La Sierra University Center for Near Eastern Archaeology, Doug Clark, launched the development of a state-of-the-art museum in the ancient town of Madaba in Jordan. Clark's signature for accepting the more than $117,000 from the Sustainable Cultural Heritage allowed long-held plans to be set in motion. The Madaba Regional Archaeological Museum and the Madaba Archaeological Park West will showcase the region's monuments from the 2nd to the 19th centuries. Clark will lead a multinational team of archaeologists and antiquities officials from the United States, Italy, and Jordan to further preserve Jordan's rich cultural past. The museum will also house exhibits from numerous excavations in the broader region, including those headed by La Sierra University. In the early 2000s, he was tapped by a former director of Jordan's Department of Antiquities to help digitize the archives of the existing museum in Madaba and train museum staff. The idea to create the museum was formed after Clark held several meetings with a group of archaeologists, artists, and scholars who wanted to find a way to preserve the region's history. The city of Madaba is mentioned several times in the Old Testament, especially when the Israelites arrived in the region after the Exodus from Egypt. Clark said, biblical archaeology contributes to the recreation of biblical times and culture, informing our reading of the Bible and providing an essential component of Bible study if we want to understand and appreciate the Bible in its original context. And finally, for the news this week, when an 8-year-old Adventist student in Colombia needed help with her social studies homework, she went to the best source she could think of and received a surprising answer.
Gabriela Rico, who is a student at the Libertad de Barrancabermeja Adventist School, was given an assignment along with her classmates to describe the accomplishments of the nation's president.
Gabriela says she looked online but had a hard time understanding what she found because they said the information was written for adults. So she decided to go to Facebook to ask Juan Manuel Santos himself.
She wrote, Mr. President Santos, my name is Gabriela Rico and I'm 8 years old. In my school, I was asked to find out what your accomplishments are as president, but I have not found much on the internet. Can you please help me?
Just 2 days later, President Santos responded to Gabriela with a video message containing the information she needed to complete her assignment.
When the president later learned that Gabriela received the highest possible grade for the assignment, he took time to congratulate her on his Instagram page.
Pues que cada uno tiene responsabilidades en la casa, en la escuela o en el trabajo, también para los grandes. Nosotros somos niños, pero aunque seamos niños, pronto ya seremos grandes y debemos siempre de ser responsables y perseverar. Como dice el dicho, no hay cosas imposibles sino personas incapaces.
Finalmente, Gabriela, ¿cuál es el mensaje que quieres dejarle a todos los niños de cuál es la mayor ilusión de tu vida?
Pues primero yo quiero que toda la gente conozca a Jesús, porque Él fue el que nos dio la vida, el que nos dio la salud, el que nos dio una familia. Él fue el que nos creó. Entonces quiero que toda la gente conozca a Jesús y que se arrepienta de sus pecados. Para los niños que descubran a Jesús, que es el mayor descubrimiento que alguien puede hacer.
Coming up, Find out what happened this week in Adventist history.
But up next, learn of a small yet powerful Christian movement that formed in northern Italy.
Olá, meu nome é Viviane e falo português. Existem muitos vídeos legais, mas poucos são traduzidos. Você pode ajudar.
Join the Amora translation and caption team today. Amora is easy to learn and fun. You can volunteer in your free time. Join this community today and provide great content in your language.
Welcome back.
In this week's episode of Lineage, learn about the Waldensians, or the people of the valleys.
Well known for their resistance to the corrupt papal church in the 12th century, the Christian movement can trace their lineage back to the time of the apostles.
They solely relied on the Word of God to help them spread biblical truth in northern Italy.
Whilst the Celtic Church was maintaining the pure apostolic faith in the British Isles and evangelizing there as well, the Waldensians were doing the same here in northern Italy. The word Waldensian means people of the valleys. Originally though, in Italian, it was Valenses with a V. It was translated into the French as Vaudois. But in the 12th century, the V changed to a W and one of the L's became a D, from where we get the name Waldensian today. The Waldensians did not see themselves as reformers. They did not see themselves as needing to separate from Rome, for they said, we have never belonged to it. They said they are part of the apostolic faith and could trace their origins all the way back to the early centuries. In fact, when we look at the history of the Waldensians over several hundred years, if not millennia, we can see that they were around in the very early centuries, in the 4th century with Vigilantes. We can see them in the 7th, the 8th, the 9th century. Some people say that the first Waldensian was Peter Waldo in the 12th century, but this is not really accurate. Whilst it is true that Peter Waldo was a merchantman from Lyon, he did sell all of his goods and commit his life to the preaching of the gospel. He was not the first Waldensian, and their roots trace back much before him. In fact, one of the early names for the Waldensians was actually the word Insabati, showing clearly that the Waldensians were Sabbath keepers, as they were named after the very day upon which they worshipped. As the Waldensians were coming up in the early centuries, and the Roman Catholic Church was forming as well, both of them saw the heathens around them as a mission field. But whilst the Roman Catholic Church used the power of the law and the sword and political alliances to win people over, the Waldensians put their faith in the strength of God's word. When you gaze on the magnificent mountains that surround us, you cannot but admit that God provided a safe retreat for his people. To the Waldensians was given the task of passing the light on to the Protestants of modern time and penetrating the darkness with true Bible doctrine. Indeed, they maintained longer than any group in the struggle to preserve the Bible and primitive Christianity. In upcoming episodes, we're going to see the caves in which they hid and where they met for worship. We're going to see the places where they trained their young people in how to study the Bible and in how to be missionaries. We're also going to climb mountains and see the cliffs over which the Waldensians were hurled to their death in times of persecution. Truly, the Waldensians stand to us today as a group of people who believed in the Bible, as a group of people who believed in mission service. They are a key part of our spiritual lineage today.
And finally, for today's program, let's turn to David Trim for a look at Adventist history.
This week, learn about Wilbur Sweeney, who pioneered Adventist mission in Barbados and the Bahamas.
Welcome to This Week in Adventist History. On April 5, 1868, Wilbur Sweeney was born in Rockfield, Illinois. He entered pastoral ministry in Minnesota in 1892, aged 24. In 1901, he and his wife Anna and their children, Roland and Joy, went as missionaries to Barbados, where Wilbur headed church work in the island country, while Anna took over the church school. Wilbur spent many years as a foreign missionary, including after Anna's premature death. Wilbur worked in Barbados, Trinidad, the Bahamas, and Bermuda, where he was mission president, and later in Central America. His powerful evangelistic preaching put Adventist mission in Barbados and the Bahamas on a firm footing. He finished his career in pastoral ministry in Texas and California. The fact that today there are more Seventh-day Adventists in the Inter-American division than any other division is due to forgotten pioneers like Wilbur Sweeney. On April 6, 1896, twin sons were born to Willie White in Cooranbong, Australia. Named Herbert Clarence and James Henry, the latter went by Harry from a young age. They left Australia as young children and grew up in California. With Ellen White as their grandmother, foreign mission service was ever kept before them as the most desirable life objective, as one of their friends later remembered. And both brothers responded to calls to serve as missionaries in China, Henry in 1921, Herbert in 1923. Both brothers went home in 1929. In this very rare movie footage that you see playing, which was filmed by Harry in 1929, you see Herbert and his wife Anna in China. Herbert managed the church publishing house, while Henry worked in education. Sadly, both brothers died young, Henry in 1954 and Herbert in 1962. That was This Week in Adventist History.
Thanks for watching ANN. Join us next week for more news from the headquarters of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
We'd love to hear from you. Send us your feedback and tell us how your church is making a difference in its community.
Be sure to capture plenty of video footage and photos, then write up a summary of the event's most important details. And feel free to send full video reports as well.
You can reach us by sending an email to adventistnews@gc.adventist.org.
Before we say goodbye, here's a passage of good news from the book of Hebrews, chapter 6, verse 10.
The passage says, "For God is not unjust. He will not forget how hard you have worked for him and how you have shown your love to him by caring for other believers, as you still do."
That's our program for this week. And remember, you can always visit news.adventist.org for daily news and videos. Until next time, God bless.
Take care.